All right, I think it is that time to start here today. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining us for this breakout session during this. This is the first virtual Sin Network gathering that we've had, and we're glad that you guys are here. Basically, we're going to be doing a breakout, and I have some distinguished pastors, guest panelists that I'm really looking forward to introduce you to. But let me just kind of frame it out a little bit. Today's session is going to be about 45 minutes long. I'm sorry, it's going to be about a total of an hour, but we're going to hopefully get some time to get some interaction with you guys and break it up. But, so I'm going to be talking to the panelists, talking to some of these pastors and leaders and practitioners. And then we'll have some time for also Q&A, and we'll just be going back and forth with you in this time. You can submit a question at any time. So you don't have to wait. You may already have some questions. You can submit a question at any time, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as time allows. Believe me, we've already talked. These guys want to be able to share and answer questions that you have, like explicit questions that you have, than us just kind of ramble for a long time. We're really excited to talk about today's topic is this simply the future of the church, or the future specifically of church planting. And what does that look like in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic? What does that look like for you? What does that look like for us all as practitioners as we are trying to navigate this new reality? And so this breakout, as well as all the other breakouts, will be recorded and available for each and every one of you early next week. So be engaged. We want to hear from you so that we can make this experience the best. We're praising the Lord that that He gives us the opportunity to do this, because it's easy. It's real easy for us to moan about wanting to come together, and we wish we were all able to come together. But the reality is that God has given us the opportunity to actually still communicate, to proclaim His word. The mission still continues, it still moves forward, and and God has given us the means in order to do that. And today, I get a chance to introduce to you guys some church planting experts, some elites, the great. Everybody on here has planted churches at one point or the other, research talked about, or is currently a part of that to some degree. And so just really excited. So first I want to introduce you Martin Vargas, founding pastor of Iglesia Real in Hollywood, Florida. So welcome, Martin. Hope you are doing well. Glad that you are here with us. All right, I'll keep it going. Second, I do want to introduce is Pastor Ed Kane, senior pastor of Grace Point Church in Alameda, California. Former home to the Oakland Raiders. I don't know if that has switched up, whether or not Oakland is kind of delaying their move to Vegas or not, but former home of the Oakland Raiders, Pastor Ed Kane, I'm so glad that you are here. And finally, Daniel Yang, who is the director of Sin Institute, who is basically the research guru, practitioner, former church planter, just a guy that I love and respect, and really looking forward to you guys sharing. So first of all, you guys can unmute yourself, and I just want to say welcome. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm really excited about this time.
Thanks, Dhati.
Thank you,
Good to be here.
Yeah, so really, today I wanted to jump in and just talk about the idea of the future of church planting. And that's really where we are. This idea, this theme that we've been talking about in this first virtual gathering of the mission moves forward has been something that is near and dear to our hearts. We've been constantly talking about the idea as a network that we need to continue to send hope, help in one another. And I think this is one thing that makes us better together than apart. Is it's like we can come together, we can gather and still dream for the future, even though it's a very uncertain and unsettling future for many of us. And the reality is that we all represent 4 different cities and 4 different states that we are in that are all handling the pandemic in a very different way, and that's really the reality. And so it's this conversation obviously is not going to hit the many diverse contexts that is addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. But what this does, that what we will have the ability to talk about is what is a framework for us to look, for the future. towards the future. And I really think that that's really important for us to do, because ultimately I always think about the idea of how can we be 21st century Christians but applying first century principles, right? That we ought to take the Bible and be able to apply it to our context, even if our context is things like the COVID-19 virus. I don't know if you guys have heard that story of a young girl. It was a young girl who asked her mom, and she was just like, "Mom, why do you cut the ends off of the ham, before you cook it?" And the mom responded back to the little girl, her daughter, and she's like, "I don't know why I cut the ends off the ham. Go ask your mother." So then my mother, your grandmother. So the little girl goes to grandma and she says, "Grandma, mom cuts the ends off of the ham, but she didn't know why she does it. So she told me to come ask you, why do you cut the ends off the end of the ham?" And she was like, "I don't know why I did it. My mother did it. Your great grandmother. Why don't you go ask her?" So then she ran to the great grandmother. They all lived in the same house. So she goes to the great grandmother, and the great grandmother goes, she says, great grandma, why mom and grandma both cut the ends off the ham, but they don't know why they cut the ends off the ham. The great grandma said, "Well, I don't know why those fools do it, but the reason why I do it is because I only had a pot so big that I had to cut the hams off in order to get it into the." And so what's so interesting, and the point of that story is that oftentimes what we do is that we kind of do copy and paste. It's like David wearing Saul's armor. We're not constantly thinking about contextualizing the gospel for our time and for our season in our place. But what the COVID-19 virus has forced us to do is forced us to contextualize the gospel. And as we think about this new normal, and as we think about what's kind of moving forward, I really think it's important for us to embrace that the gospel must be contextualized in order for us to do that. And we can no longer just simply copy and paste what they did in the 50s or in the 60s or whenever our favorite time in history, was, but we can look at history so that we can apply it to this context. So we ought to be able to faithfully hold the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other hand, and show how the Bible is speaking to our day and our generation. And so I really think that that is important. So let me just frame this. Is that there's this article that came out that talked about reshaping. It actually is something that I talked about today on our We Are Sin Network podcast, that talked about this idea of reshaping that we have. And it just talked about just ministries, and how we're looking at ministries. And, the question is, are we still cutting off the ends of the ham? Or are we, doing things that are relevant for our context, specifically in the COVID or even the future as we move forward? And it breaks it up into basically 4 categories. It talks about V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery, J-shaped recovery, and L-shaped recovery. And this is basically as we think about the new normal. And it's sort of like the new normal like it was in 9/11. You remember back in 9/11 when you were able to walk your loved ones right up to the airport, kiss them and then go. And now it's kind of like you got to drop them off as, you're driving, and you got police officers telling you to hurry up even in that. Like, keep it moving, drop them off, say your goodbyes. And so it's like, that's a new normal. Like, we're never going back to the way it was in the future. Now, we don't know what those new normals are today, but we do know that there are going to be new normals. And so what this document does, it helps us to say, what are those things that are V-shaped? What will come back quickly? And how can we think about those things? What are the U-shaped? What's going to come back, but it's going to come back a lot slower. It's going to have a slow return back. J-shaped recovery is, what is those things that we're going to accelerate? Like, we didn't have it before, but now that we have it, like, some of us are recognizing, man, there's an internet, there's like virtual is actually an option that we can use, and some people are like going to be ramping up the usage of that they're going to accelerate that. And then what is the L shape? What are those things that's not going to come back? That they served us well in the past, but now in this new normal, they're just not going to take place. So I just wanted to kind of use that to help frame our conversation. But I would love to hear kind of like, in light of that, and like, and how you guys are looking at the new normal and just what this looks like in the future. I'd love to kind of go with that. And so let's kick it off with you, Ed. Like as you think about the new normal, what are some of the thoughts that you are thinking about in terms of what's going to come back quickly, what's not going to come back? How are you rethinking this new normal?
Oh wow, that's kind of overwhelming. All the different things you laid out there. So, I think what's coming back quickly is small group ministry, groups of 10. We've already reorganized in groups of 10, and they're already zooming. And Alameda County, San Francisco, Santa Clara were the first ones to go into lockdown. It looks like we're going to be the last ones out.
Mm.
So, as soon as it's permitted, I think those things. What's going to what we're really grappling with, because we're a collegiate church planting ministry, is are we going to go ahead with our church planting strategy coming fall? And we said no. Some people said, just some of our thinking, some people said, well, we can plant everywhere because we can plant online. And we have to have a real kind of biblical values kind of discussion around our leadership, and said, no, I think online is great, but planting a church is ultimately kind of an embodiment, like an
Well,
outpost of the kingdom, and we're not going to plant online. We're going to continue to do outreach and evangelism online. So, and we're looking very hard at the future of the college ministry and the future of cities. And I think one thing that I'm taking away from all of this is make all of your plans provisionally, because you can't really project out too much. And so we're trying to really work on agility, work on projects that we can do now, so that when things do come back, we'll have those ready. And there are a lot of things that we wanted to work on that we haven't been working on. So everybody's sort of putting their heads down and actually trying to be productive during this time. But I think small group ministry, definitely, that's going to come back right away. Probably slower is big auditorium, preaching. I think a lot of us preachers are having identity crisis, like, are we out of a job?
man, no, that is for real. And I don't know if you guys have gotten used to it or what you have done, but preaching to a camera is definitely a new thing. And
Hmm.
it's something that we are all kind of used to. Not, I don't know if we're used to. We all got to get accustomed to very quickly, and so that's been something that has definitely. That's very interesting that you have that. Like Martin, I know that you have a very global approach, and what I mean by global, very global and local. Approach to how you go about doing your ministry. I mean, with travel, being cut, our borders being international borders being closed off. Like, how are you adjusting to this pandemic and like even the new normal and being able to engage?
Well, I would say that we have been experienced so many V moment and U moment and J moment, where we know in these last 9 weeks that the first thing that we want to do is how we adapt our church in some areas that we were not prepared for. That if we knew it, I will be preparing. Even some of our area, like for example, in the tithe and offering financial aspect, uh, we were 70% prepared. So now we have been going up to 90%, 95%, including sale that we never use it. And now it's a huge help for the people who are part of this. But locally, what we did is we have been approaching our community like never before. And we have been very active locally and globally, like you said. But we have been having some opportunity with the Broward Shirley office that we never had it before. Opportunity with the mayor of the city of Hollywood that we never had before. Even we have a great relationship, and the community is accepting and is understanding that the church is located in that place for a reason. And
Yeah.
for example, when we did the drive-through with food, feeding our community first, our church family and the community, the mayor was there. And he told to me, the only thing that he said, Martin, the thing that I most appreciated is that you put the people out of the house,
Mm.
because there's now a resistance to get out.
Hmm.
So they need to see that we need to get out. Of course, following all the instruction, all the regulation, all the steps. We are preparing our return back. Opposite as Ed. Ed see his small group going first. I go with a big auditorium first before the small groups. So it's amazing how
Yeah.
different it is in two
And I think
states.
And I think that's gonna, because that's the interesting thing. And just like you said, I mean, what Ed talked about, from California to Florida to even Georgia, like we've had some city from some places in Georgia, a church already reopened full go, and they like after 2 weeks, they're already closing back again because they reopened. Then all of a sudden, they got the pandemic, COVID-19 cases, and then they closed again. But on one end, you have states that are saying, "Hey, we can reopen," but then in places they have a stage and they have phase process. And I think that's just we got to be led by the Holy Spirit. But what we've done, and again, we have placed many resources for you to be able to talk about what are some different precautions that you can take in order for us to all reopen whatever that is in a very safe environment. Again, we want to hear from you guys. We want to hear from you guys. Keep the questions coming. I mean, you can ask them in the questions panel. Remember the questions panel that's in there, and then we'll basically get as many of them answered today. But this is where we're gonna be able to chance to interact with you guys in there. Daniel,
I'm sorry. Something else. For example, in our process, we are watching 2 Samuel, where King David brought the ark again to the city of Jerusalem. And in that process, if you read in 2 Samuel, he gave and his team gave 6 steps. Number 6 is number of men. Number 7 is the number of God. So we are going to the V shape in 6 steps from here to soon reopening.
No,
number
that's
7,
good.
God.
Yeah, and you can't argue with the Bible. That's what I always love is that whenever you want to do something, just get a Bible verse, and you just cannot argue with the Bible. And there it is. That's the V shape according to Martin Vargas in 2 Samuel. That is it. Daniel, let's kind of come to you. I mean, you spend a lot of your time on the posts of church planning and all that with the Sin Institute. You're with you have a missiological council. You got people all over who are constantly thinking about this, all the way from not just the SBC but denominations all over. So before we kind of open it up to the larger audience, I would love to kind of hear from you is how is this going to impact church planning?
That's a good question, and it's not one that I don't think there is any particular idea what that looks like. I think the reality of what's in front of us right now is that there's an opportunity, that we have an opportunity to make decisions that we wouldn't have made before. That the pandemic actually gives us an excuse to really pull the trigger on some of the things, and maybe it was a missional project, or maybe it was a leadership pipeline that we wanted to develop, and the pandemic really has given us the excuse to do that. And I think it's going to be those things that will actually impact the future. The way that we've been coaching hundreds of churches in a couple dozen networks over the last 2 months, and we realize that there's kind of a right now pre-vaccine. If we think about it, pre-vaccine, we kind of have the spring and the summer to really invest in missional leaders. So before, if you had small group leaders, this is a great time, spring and summer, to convert them to missional leaders. What I mean by that is before, when they were hosting people in their homes for a Book of Ruth study or something like that, now that spring and summer is a great time to energize them, invest in them, let them know you love them, and then teach them what mission looks like, not just to reopen the church, but to rebuild the community. And so I think there's a concerted effort to use the spring and summer months for that. The fall is a great idea. I really don't think where I'm at, we're going to be gathering in groups of larger than 50 or 100 in the fall. I just don't think so. Our mayor has been our governor has been pretty clear about that. But I think the fall is going to be, we have a chance for hybrid type meetings where if you do meet in large groups, 50, 100, that's the meeting place of your missional leaders, where and I think, again, if you develop these kinds of patterns, which again, I mean, Ed, Pastor Ed and Grace Point, you guys have done a fantastic job at this, but you're bringing your people through a pipeline with inside your church system. Your large group gathering is now functioning as visioning and training and equipping. Post-vaccine, now you've got a larger pool of people that you've developed that are potentially church planters, church planting team members. And so in my mind, part of the process has been helping existing churches and church planting organizations to reimagine that we have like a 6 to 9 month window to really develop pipelines.
I love that. I love what you're talking about, this idea of reimagining,
Yeah.
turning them from small group leaders to missional leaders. If no one hasn't tweeted that, I will, because
Mhm.
that is good, because that is that when we talk about the new normal, and many times we've been saying like so many of our members are opting out of the Great
Mhm.
Commission. Like we're all about the Great Commandment, and and loving one another. We're all about doing our Sunday gatherings. We're all about kind of things, but so many of us are opting out of doing the Great Commission. And this is a great opportunity for us to be missional because one, people are ready to get out. They're ready to get out. They're
Yep.
also, this is kind of reigniting, I think, to a lot of ways, reigniting the passion that people have to want to give themselves to something greater,
Mhm.
than themselves. And I think that you are hitting spot on, Daniel. So, man, that's really good. And I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing and helping to coach churches along along that line. Let's
Mhm.
take some time and let's open it up. Again, if you guys have questions, please keep them coming. You put it in the questions panel, and we're gonna hit as many as possible today. And so we already got some coming in, and we got Scott Knudsen, who's gonna let us know and give us a question by question. So go ahead, Scott.
All right. Hey, Dahadi. So we've got a couple about equipping and training planters. Charles Campbell asks, what competencies, skills, or topics will you change up when equipping or training planters in light of COVID? And Ken Cordray kind of echoed that and said, hey, we do need to be more about vine work. So what might change within Send Network to accommodate this with our planters along the lines of training and expectations?
Man, that is a great question. So let's start with you, Daniel, because you kind of mentioned that in the very
Sure.
beginning, this idea of changing them from small group leaders to missional. So as we are thinking about this new normal, what are some practical training things or even some competencies that we can be targeting and aiming for as it creates thinking missiologically?
Yeah. It's a great question, Charles. And I know that you think about this every day. And so thank you for your time and investment on that. I think there are a couple of things that I don't know if it's going to be an abrupt change to the church planter profile, what we would call competencies. But I think there's some things that we're learning about the new future of just church in general, and that is that there's a value of the digital interaction. And when I say that, I'm not saying social media, or good website tweeting, those kinds of things, but somebody who has an eye for understanding how to accentuate communal life, body life through technology. That's one of the biggest struggles right now for pastors and church planters, is to actually facilitate meaningful connections over technology. And so I don't think that changes the profile, but it does change the way that we think about, like, how do you develop, cultivate team dynamics that moving forward, this is probably something in Send Network that I think we should really investigate, because there is some tremendous technology that we've not used and we've discovered over the last few months. And then just the second thing I think is, and this is, I know that, we're in the middle of a rewrite for our Send Network curriculum, and a lot of this is going to be in there. But I think church planters are having a shift from thinking about just, opening gatherings to community development. And so if church planters begin thinking like a community developer, I think that's going to be a huge value, because again, the underlying I think value that a church brings to a neighborhood is the incarnated body of Christ, or the manifested body of Christ on a Sunday morning, but it's also the intangibles of being present locally. And I think that's how a community developer thinks. They just think, how do we add value to the community around us? And obviously that leads to evangelistic opportunities. So I would say those two are something that we should investigate.
Yeah, I think those are really good two things to hit. And it's kind of that community development. I think we're gonna have to make sure that we are looking at this holistically. It's one of our values that we talk about, restoration, and that's, we got to address spiritual, emotional, economic, and social. And the Corona-19 virus is hitting all of those things. I mean, we're seeing this taking place over and over and over and again. and specifically around the emotional piece. We're seeing anxiety, we're seeing all these things shoot up that are taking place. And I think that is definitely a core competency that is not like emotional health is not just a thing that we can get to or is just something like it needs to be a part of our core curriculum, when we're talking about anxiety, because I think the less human interaction that we have because of, all the, even before, because of the gadgets and because of social media, the more we're going to, have to ramp up emotional health and emotional intelligence. And I think that is critical. Let's go to the next question and then let's go to the next question, Scott.
All right, so several have asked about launching a church plant in the middle of this. Jim Scott, Adam Bailey, Corwin Oglesby, and a few others have asked questions like, what advice do you have to encourage prospective church planters to keep pursuing their launch date during this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ed, let's start off with what you said. You have made the decision not to launch any churches, but you said that you had that, a range of those kind of opinions in your staff meeting. Take us into your staff meeting, and talk a little bit about that, and and even how you led you to the decision to wait. But like, let's talk about just that in terms of preparing to launch.
Yeah, it wasn't. So our situation is pretty unique because we're looking at a fall semester, and our method had not evolved yet. But our method is to go on a campus and create a lot of attractional events and compete with the frats and clubs to get our share of the freshmen to share the gospel with. So it's a big net, and we just felt like freshmen aren't going to show up in the fall for the most part. And so the fact that we're going to defer for 1 year became pretty clear right away. And then the response to that is, well, why don't we plant, quote unquote, online? And so then we had to kind of think about, like, okay, what would that look like? And in our case, we decided no, because we really want to land on a particular campus and love the students who come. But on the other hand, the reason we had that discussion at all was because of the incredible response we got through our online churches. And what that turned out to be was, even though we try to be very evangelistic at our church and want to keep our share of unchurched people in the chairs for our Sundays and gatherings really high, we realized that people who will show up versus people who just log in, like the threshold is so much lower, and we've had people logging in that from everywhere. And so that forced us to really kind of think about our messages and really craft our message to non-Christians. So I know that I'm sort of veering off of the call of the question here, but I think part of church planting in this new era would have to involve very evangelistic preaching online, because non-Christians increasingly just will not show up to a Christian space formally defined as such. And so going back to the earlier question about competencies, I think that is a competency within our own church that we're beginning to value and prioritize a lot more. As for launching a church in this environment, we're just deciding to put it off a year.
Yeah, no, that's good insight. And I think this idea of how do we reach evangelistically is really going to be critical, and how do we keep people's attention, in the midst of that, because getting on and scrolling through Facebook or scrolling through the internet and kind of trolling and jumping on a little bit and jumping off, and like I think it was like 13 seconds for you to get in, on Facebook. And so it's kind of like, it's so real, it's hard, and people jump on and jump off all the time. And so it's like, how do you measure commitment? And I think it can sometimes be a false reality, in doing that. And so I just think that is something that we got to be aware of as we're gathering core teams, that if you are going to gather a core team, you have to think about, how are you differentiating? At Blueprint, we talk about between guests, friends, and family. Like those guests, those friends, and family, because we want our guests to become friends and our friends to become family. And that most of the times you want to plant churches with family commitments. When you don't have a core team that is like, that has that family type of commitment, it's really hard. So you have to really think through, even if virtually, if you're going to plant virtually, how am I going to differentiate family from just the guests and the friends that are kind of coming and going? And I think that that's harder to do, but I'm not saying it's impossible to do. All right, what's the next question?
All right, next question comes from Michael O'Neill, and he asks, how can sending and supporting churches be more equipped to partner with church plants as we move through this pandemic and into the future? And then Brian asks a related question, which is, how do we need to better support and watch over planters in this time?
Yeah, that's really good. Martin, you have planted and sent out many churches, and I would love to hear kind of how are you as a multi-time, if that's a word, multi-time, is that a word? I'm gonna go with it. A multi-time planter, or what we call is a multiplication church within our network. How are you caring for those people that you've sent out as both supporting or sending capacity?
That's something that will be needed more than ever, the network. So in these last 2 months, the network and the partnership with other churches is what is having me making the difference. We got the example in one of the video with Bruce, how we partnered together, but church sending, for example, I bring the local and the global. In the local, Joaquin Vargas is my brother. He was in the last assessment that we did it in our assessment center in Hollywood. So he was sent and he started his church right in the month that the pandemic, COVID-19, started coming to the United States. That was around February, March. So the question is how he can be survived if he continue inside the house. So what we did is through the partnership, we saw his heart to open as soon as possible when the state around allow it, and then we sent a team over there, our technical team, to help it to connect online as well to get people in connecting with him. So this last Sunday, my team was there preparing him, and he has already 57 people in a 6 feet distance in his first service. So amazing. How come a guy that is starting a church planting during COVID-19? But what made the difference? The partnership. But
That's
now
good.
you take this to global.
But you know what? I'm going to be stopping you for a minute, Martin, because I love how as soon as you said that there's 57 people gathering, that you said they're keeping their social distance. I just couldn't let you
Isn't it normal?
In this new pandemic, is like the shame that automatically comes that you feel like you have to defend yourself if you're gonna gather. Like I immediately, it was social distancing though, so it's just kind of like
it was a big deal. But
is,
something important, for example, many of the churches that we have been planting are in Cuba, in the jungle of Peru, in Argentina, Bolivia, and they don't have the technology that we have. They don't have the resources that we have. What is the church that they have been going for the last 2 months and a half? Iglesia Real. They connect, they send all the link to all the members, and every single Sunday, we see people from Iquiro, Peru, sending photo, and the whole church is connected through the technology. So even if we go back to the building, we need to keep this. We need to keep this because these people, and many of them, we don't know how long it will take.
man,
so
that's really
we need to be doing this through partnership and Saint Network. Saint Network is a great tool right now.
That the stuff that you're talking about, a lot of times you don't even consider those types of things, and especially in different countries. And that's why I've always loved your global approach, both global and local, and you're a practitioner in both ways. This is an important question, specifically as we are seeking, because the goal of the Sin Network is discover, develop, and deploying church planting teams from within. And so the more that we're sending out churches, the more we're going to be sending and supporting churches.
Yes.
So Daniel, I would love to hear from you.
Sure.
And even Ed, like if you guys can briefly, before we go to our next question, briefly just give like what are some other ways that people are supporting and sending churches in this time from the church that's sending or supporting.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's important as a church, a sending church, to know your planter. So let me be specific. If your planter is in pre-launch phase, let's suppose that that's their model and they're going to launch. This is probably the time to begin working with them closely on reevaluating their strategy, because there's going to be a temptation for that planter to say, you know what, since we can't launch, quote unquote, that I'm just gonna do everything on social media. And I think working with that planter without, increasing anxiety in their life, but working with that planter to actually think about what are some gathering modes that you can begin creating right now that will eventually translate into in-person meeting. And I think a planter may not know that intuitively, because for a lot of planters, 75%, according to the stats, are looking forward to that big day, right? And so I think if I'm the missions pastor, church planting pastor, senior pastor, I'm working with a planter, I'm thinking, okay, how can I help this planter who's pre-launch create 5 sustainable small groups? And it doesn't have to be small groups, it could be triads, groups of 3 people that are leading small mission projects or something like that. So I'm helping them think through some of those strategies. And then secondly, on the technology side, if your planter has a particular technological need right now, and I've seen churches do this quite a bit, especially if you're in the same city, allowing them to borrow the facilities for shooting, I think a lot of churches are starting to do that right now. But then go the extra layer and ask your planter, okay, so what are the technological needs that you think would be helpful for you to create meaningful connections right now? And let us help you make some of those. Because we know you don't have the lights and the cameras and all that stuff. So, we want to help you do that. And so I think those are just some real practical things that I think every planter would be like, you know what, if I'm 6 months on the ground, I don't know anybody, I love a church to do that for me.
Yeah, just being able to have that is critical. And
Yeah.
just a minute or less, I mean, I know that you're doing a lot of, I mean, you have planters on the ground and all over the country right now. And I've always respected your motto as a sending church to all these pastors. What are you doing currently right now to help shepherd them in the midst of this pandemic?
Um, one of the things that we did that was really fruitful was we realized that nobody's an expert because the world's been turned upside down. So we quickly set up a board. We called it Convo, where everybody just shares everything from Zoom techniques, like how to have a fun icebreaker game over Zoom, Mural, new tools, new things that worked. Guys hate chatting. How do we get guys involved? And how do we do online discipleship over Zoom? What worked, what didn't? And all of those things, including like really nerdy techie stuff. So everybody's sharing on this. And it's way better than Slack or email. It's just people. It's a much lower barrier. So it's kind of an internal bulletin board that's really accelerated learning, and everybody's learning from each other, so that we can be kind of agile and respond to things like week by week, almost day by day. So that's been very fruitful.
Yeah, man, that's really helpful. I love that.
That's very Silicon Valley of you, Ed.
Yeah, we got a lot of them.
That is so true. That is so true. Okay, let's go to the next question, Scott.
All right, 2 questions kind of related here, but a lot of people have asked about the balance of having church online versus in person. So John Monty says, what suggestions might you have for how we can, even now, build an understanding within our church plants and the watching communities of the high value of churches physically coming together? And Ben Fleet asks, we've found that we've had a large online presence on our church online from all over North America. So when COVID-19 has passed us, should we continue ministering to these people or leave them to the hands of a local church?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think all of us are hitting, seeing people come and joining in on our services, or, I do a Facebook Live every day, with our church, and there's people from just different places. So one of the questions that I heard in there was just simply, what is the good balance between doing that in person and like online? And then even as we think about the future, that kind of goes back to the V versus L versus J. Like, how do we keep doing that, or what do we do in the future? I mean, have you guys wrestled with that? Anybody?
Yeah, you know what? One thing that I'm sensitive to about overemphasizing gathering together as a church ASAP, and we're a very, very communal, very face-to-face community. One thing I've noticed is, and it's very surprising, the range of fears present in our church. Even though our church average age is like 26, some people are pretty frightened about this. And so they're citing public health concerns, but I know that underlying it is an actual fear. And I'm very, very sensitive to not make this a divisive issue at our church. And so I'm thinking about gathering, and once we gather, it's going to be celebratory, it's going to be good, it's not going to be everybody 6 feet away with masks and it's just kind of a miserable experience. Because when you see people, man, you just, like when I run into people in the parking lot, I just end up wanting to hug them. And then so I think you got to think through that first opening and not rush it, and be sensitive so that this doesn't become, because it's getting polarized, and even mask wearing is becoming political in America, go figure. So I feel like within our own church, we can't assume that everybody feels like we do. They're itching to get together. And if we don't pace it right, it could be a divisive issue within our church where, like, we didn't know that such a division existed before. So I'm really sensitive about that. With respect to the online church, I think that's why the online church has to be very, very evangelistic and not lead to sheep stealing, or not lead to creating the lowest barrier for the laziest people to, like the worst expression of consumerist Christianity.
Oh, look at that. You just said the lowest barrier for the laziest Christian. You guys, again, that's another tweetable comment right there. You heard it here. I mean, I think that is so critical, because, I mean, so, and to some degree, there could be, like, we could perpetuate this consumerism and this consumer. I mean, I know that there's people who literally just, that just they can go to like 10 different churches in a day, and just kind of like go from church to church and those type of things. So yeah, I thought that's a huge. Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, sorry. I'm talking to a couple of churches and just hearing them analyze their stats, and they can kind of tell, like, who's really tuning in, and based on, like, the retention and all that stuff. One thing that we could think about as a network is, to intentionally say, if you're a church that you have a high volume of people who are watching from outside of your vicinity, that you would say at least, that you value the local church. And we belong to a larger family of churches called the Send Network. And there are Send Network churches, in your city. I think that's a strategic way to redirect people back to their local spots. And if for some reason, if you're seeing a lot of traffic being driven from a particular city, then you can even be a little bit more pointed in that. I think that's worthwhile. In our coaching with some of the churches that have gone through our cohorts, we've been very sensitive to the idea of sheep stealing that Ed mentioned. I think it's worthwhile for pastors to say, we realize that some of you don't have an online service at your church right now, and we're so glad that we can fulfill that need for you. But then I think it's worthwhile getting to know who isn't a part of your church that's connecting and why. Because I do think some churches will experience a little bit of a growth once you start gathering, because you're taken from others. But I think it's a courteous thing to acknowledge that you're probably having others view. And I've seen some other churches who actually do this really well. They say, if you're not a part of this church here, we're going to have a family conversation right now, and they'll kind of delineate it right there. And I think without trying to create too much inside speak, I think it's helpful to make some of those delineations so people can be encouraged to not just consume. They realize that this is actually a family.
Yeah. That's really good practical wisdom, and I love that. And so on one end, we can see this as a both and, because it's a huge blessing, like Martin said earlier, from some churches who cannot afford the technology. But I think it's like, Daniel, like you said, as a common courtesy, it's as good to say, I'm glad that we're able to meet this need right now. However, as we come back together and as we think to even have those relational touches about knowing, and I think it also creates a relational touch point of knowing the people who are joining you, who are coming in, and you can real quickly find that out, whether or not if they came to know the Lord through the ministry of what you've been doing, or if they were already a believer, faithfully serving a different church, and were just sheep stealing. You guys understood what I meant. So I think that's really, really good. Thank you. All right, Scott, what do you have for us?
All right, so another Scott McDowell asks, what is the one thing that your church did prior to COVID that you will not do post-COVID? And what's the one thing that you started doing that you'll continue to do when things return to normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start off with that one. I mean, one of the things I'll just start off with the things that we did not do that we would do. I mean, I don't know if anybody on here follows me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any of that. If you do, I'm sorry, because over the course of my Twitter, Facebook,
Your
Instagram,
monthly tweets.
yeah, like I tweet like once a year, and it's like it's just I don't do anything. But I have discovered social media in a real way that is a very proactive and a very positive way that I've been able to really shepherd our people and get more access to some of our people on a real way. So every day on Facebook Live, I do a thing weekdays with the Hottie, and it's every day from 11 a.m. to 11:30, and I'm there and I'm just really able to connect with my members. It's primarily for my members. There's obviously other people who have been joining in. It has received great connectivity, pastors and leaders, and then even just our churches been able to do it. Like we've done everything from we talk about how do you go from a quiet time to proclaiming the word. We'll bring them into the study of our pastors as they're studying and how they went from studying the word to presenting the word. We've talked about all the way from just even the things that divide us. That's what we're currently talking about, the things that divide us, and talk about the Ahmaud Arbery situation and his murder, and this, like, how are we addressing that? And we talk about the divide between. So this has been anyway a great platform for us to be able to engage with them. And obviously you don't have to be as extreme with me. I like go hard, but that's something that we've been doing, and I think that I will continue to do, even once the pandemic, because this has been just a great way to connect with more people in our congregation, and being able to address it with the interaction on Facebook Live. It brings some of that personal touch and this constant interaction that has been really helpful. So that's one thing that we weren't doing that we will do kind of in the future. What about you guys? What is something that either you won't start back up, and what are that you started that you won't be doing in the future, or that you will be doing more in the future?
I think the intentionality that's come into creating family resources for the weekend, man, I don't know if we should have been doing that, a long time ago. But I think the focus on parents discipling children, and they're having a Sunday experience together, versus kind of we get to a building, everybody goes into their own room. And so I think that's been really rich for our groups, and personally we've benefited so much from that, because we go beyond just streaming a service. We're actually, as a family now, interacting. And I realized that even as a pastor, church planter, like there were some intentional things that I didn't do on the weekends with my kids that now I get to do. And I almost kind of hope that doesn't go away. So the family dynamic, I think, is important right now.
Mhm.
That's really good.
In my case, I think that what we gotta continue doing after that we never did it before. We have been transmitting live in our service for many years, maybe 6-7 years, but we have been changing the platform, and the last platform we were using was Facebook Live. With the pandemic, during this period, we are using Restream because it gives me the capability to the same live service transmitted up to 30 different platforms. So expanded the broad way to connect with people outside. I will continue doing that because on March 22nd, Facebook Live collapsed because all the people that were in all the churches transmitting, everybody gets some problem. But I didn't, because I was transmitting with Restream in different platforms, and people switch from Facebook Live to YouTube or to LinkedIn, whatever platform they love it, they get it. I will keep that. Also, WebEx meeting. I didn't use Zoom because Zoom it was more risky for me and for our people. I'm using Cisco, that is very well known for his security level. So we have been using WebEx and helping other churches to use it as well. So we got 6 lines. And from those 6 lines, we use 4 every day. So we can have in the same time 4 different small group, family groups. We got 18. So we continue using that after we return back. And also, I would say the way that we teach our church, that a lot of them have been learning, especially Latinos, that we don't come to the church. Now we are the church. So it's not the building. The building is a beautiful theater that has been closed for the last 2 months, but the church is alive, and the church has been embracing the community, embracing the Great Commission more than ever before. So we are the church, and we are a network, and we have partnered with other people. So those things we stay.
That's really good. That's really good. And these are some really good questions, you guys. Keep the questions coming. I mean, again, you can ask them. We got about 10 more minutes left on this. So we want to make sure that you guys have the questions. We're trying to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So just wanted you guys to know. I mean, they talked a lot about what we have done, what we started. Ed, is there anything that you don't ever see coming back?
No, I think eventually everything will come back as disruptive and as people say that this is. I think the new normal will come back, and the new normal will include, I think, eventually a vaccine, and this will be a memory, and I think things are going to come back. It's just that period of 2-3 years can be a huge opportunity. And so, like you, I think a lot of the things that you guys mentioned, we started. And I think those are going to continue.
Yeah. So I'll give you guys, before we go to the next question, the over under 12 months. 12 months is the over under of the new normal. Are you, and again, meaning getting back together and connecting, what are you taking? The over under, Daniel?
Boy, I'm going to take the over.
Over? Okay.
Yeah.
The over. Ed, over under.
I don't know what that term means. It must be a sports thing.
Over under. Do you think it's going to be longer or shorter to getting back to the new normal?
I think it'll be just about. I think it'll be just about a year. I'm looking forward to 2021, sending out our teams that we were on deck to go out in 2020. So by 2021 September, I think we should be back.
All right, Martin, over under, or how long?
How long? I think the same time that Ed said, around a year, around 12 months. But
part of the over under is that you can't pick the 12 months. You got to either say 20 months, or you got to say 11 months. But you can't pick what I've given.
Let me optimistic.
They're not gamblers.
Yeah. Praise the Lord, because that is, I guess it's a gambling term, but we don't gamble. We don't promote gambling at all. So we're going to go ahead and move on and not even use those types of terms at all. All right. So let's get back. Scott, we got about 8 minutes. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next couple of questions related to evangelism. Corwin asks, what platforms have proven to be most effective in engaging non-believers that are not connected to the church? And Sunil asks, can you give us a way to show how we can evangelize in these times of social distancing?
All right, so evangelism, you seem to get excited about that, Martin. So
yes.
What are some ways that you've been reaching out evangelistically in these times?
Yeah, one of the things is, like you mentioned before, in the social media, you cannot measure how long the people are looking at a Sunday service. But in the small groups meeting that is live, you can see how many people, families, all my family, for the first time in life in 40 years, are watching the service, are connecting small groups and asking questions. Number one. Number two, there was a group, I received a letter like 10 days ago from a lady, an Argentinian lady. She asking me to help a group of Argentinians that couldn't fly out from United States. There were around 3,000 Argentinians. The vast majority of them, I could say almost all of them, non-believer. So then I sent help. I sent a team, provide food, provide things to around 70 that were in a hotel. But when they came back, I said, you know what? I only have one chance, one opportunity probably to talk to these people about Jesus Christ. So I invite them to gather in a church close to the hotel. So in the partnership with the church in Hialeah, I told them, I need you pavilion outside. I will bring 2 buses of Argentinian. All of them, none of them know Christ. And I want to tell my story because it's very similar to the story that they have been living, abandoned in a country that there is no their country, and that they cannot go back because all the flights have been canceled, and they're being desperate without no money. And I share the gospel. And if I give you the testimony, you won't believe it. And all of that now, all the Argentina, in North Miami, in Aventura, in the whole South Florida, are talking about who is Iglesia Real that help our citizens in this moment as this. That's an incredible opportunity that we have to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and plant the seed.
Man, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear, and just like even the intentionality, what you're doing with that, and just like we said, like there's so many different opportunities that this does open up, the door for us for the gospel to be proclaimed. Let's Ed, quickly, we're like you've been talking a lot about evangelistic, and doing more evangelism. What are some ways that you have been leveraging this platform?
We realize that there's a real vacuum in the marketplace of Christian materials that are actually specifically evangelistic in the social media world. There's a lot of curriculum because there's a big market for that. And then there's a lot of hardcore apologetics, but we're straddling right in the middle there about life coherence issues and things like that. So what we're doing is we started a team to create short, shareable, evangelistic video content. And so we're in the middle of work, and we realize everything has to be video. Everybody's learning video editing, and I think it's going to be a learning curve, but we're attacking it because we realize face-to-face evangelism, relational evangelism, that's what we know, and now everything has to move online, and there has to be online platform-specific kind of evangelistic tools, and that's basically shareable. And then we release that so that our people can share it across their social networks.
Oh, I love that. I love that. You guys, we got about 4 minutes left. And I just wanted to remind everybody, like, we are excited about being able to lay this out virtually, sitting there, we're gathering. This is our first one that we're doing. We're going to be doing another one on June the 4th. We actually got our Canadian team and pastors all across all of Canada that's going to be sharing with us on June the 4th in a very similar way that you can register now in your link. You register now on June the 4th, and basically you get a chance to hear about more of the church planting in all across Canada, and so we're really excited about that time. You guys, we got about 3 minutes left. I don't know if you guys watch, like the old game shows or whatever, but we're going to go into a speed round. I mean, speed round means we're going to be able to answer questions like, 10 seconds or less, like this, like real short, pithy to, answers. Think tweetable, quotable, those types of answers. And we're just going to hit as many questions as we round out this time. So let's go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, Tahati, go ahead and hit Daniel, Ed, and Martin.
I didn't hear what he just said.
I think he wanted each one of us to go ahead and say something. Is that
okay? Okay. I thought, yeah. So you guys, like, as we wrap up, let's just give kind of a, just closing remarks. Again, speed round, close it out. Let us know kind of how, as you look at this, the foreseeable future, give us your godly wisdom. Daniel, let's kick it off with you.
I'll go first because I may be the youngest, so I don't want to be, outdone by the. My wisdom is not going to be as great as Brother Ed's or Martin's, but I think this is a season where you might not be able to go wide, but you can go deep. Really invest in your leaders, show them that you care for them. This is a good respite for you as well. Build them up missionally. Build their children up missionally, and I have no doubt that if you do that, you'll see some fruit come out of this on the back end. So
that's good. That's really good. Martin, what about you?
One thing is to know God's word. Another thing is to know. One thing is to know the word of God. Another thing is to know the God of the word. So I think in this season we'll go back. I'm not talking about reopening because we never been closed. The church never been closed. So I don't call it reopening. I'm calling
That's good.
back to his house and out of hours. That's the time now for us. I will do in the speech tomorrow to the church, but we're going to his house, back to his house and out of hours.
That's a great word. That's a great word. Ed, close us out. What do you have?
I think pastors are insecure, stressed out, worried about a certain kind of leadership picture that seems to be under threat. I think we should mourn, grieve, die, let that go, and just be open-handed and ready to serve our people, even if that means we're out of a job.
Man, that is a great word. Like, you got to work yourself out of a job. Amen. You guys, I just really appreciate your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I just want to say thank you guys for attending. You know, this time you guys have been a blessing. Hopefully you guys have been blessed as I have been blessed, because this has been a good time. Remember, before you leave, register now for June 4th. And we will hear from Sin Network Church planters from all across Canada. This is going to be another great time about, like, how do we maximize the moment? How do we just kind of create this time and this opportunity? You guys don't want to miss that. And again, just don't forget, stop cutting off the ham. Remember, the end of the ham. We got to be Christians in the 21st century. Let's not just cut the hams off because they did it in the past. We got to make sure that we are able to properly contextualize the hope of the gospel for this time and for this season.
Amen.
God bless you guys. I appreciate you. Keep the conversation going, and just like we have on there on the hashtag Sin Network Gathering. We love you. God bless. We'll see you guys later.